All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started here. First of all, thank you all for joining us in our first webinar series for 2024. We did a similar thing in 23, using a lot of the same information. A couple new rules we'll cover throughout our three-week series. Hope you get a basic understanding of each of the rules we cover for the next 3 weeks. My name is Amanda Braun. I am the Assistant Director of Championships and Golf Operations with the VSGA. Also on the call tonight is Amanda Kelly, who is a Manager for Championships and Golf Operations, who will help answer questions throughout our presentation today. We do want this to be interactive. So if you do have any questions, and we hope you came with questions or have questions throughout the presentation, we're going to use the Q&A button that is at the bottom of your screen to ask those questions. And we will go ahead and answer as we can online tonight, or writing back to you. We're trying to keep all the questions to the rules we're going through today. So we might push some questions if they involve something that's going to be covered in the next couple weeks. But go ahead and feel free to use that Q&A button to start typing your questions in if you have any, or throughout the presentation, and we'll answer them when we get to the question slides. We're also working on putting together a couple full day rules of golf workshops in person in different areas of the state. And we hope to have that full schedule released in the next week or so. So be on the lookout for that if you enjoy the rules of golf and want a deeper understanding of the rules. We're going to bring back our full day series, which we haven't done in a while. This presentation is also recorded. We recorded the one that happened at noon as well. And between the two, we will go ahead and have one of them posted to the VSGA website along with the slide deck. So in case you wanted to go back and review either this presentation or future presentations, if you can't make one of the next 2 weeks, just know that those will be posted sometime later this week, in the future 2 weeks as well. So that'll be available to you to review. We'll go ahead and get started here. So we'll go ahead and in this presentation today, we're going to cover a brief introduction to the rules of golf and what resources are available to you. We'll cover the parts of the course, forms of play, and end with our ball handling section today to prepare us for what's going to come in the next couple weeks. So the introduction to the game. We're going to start very basic here. What is golf? So golf is played in a round of 18 fewer holes on a course by striking a ball with a club. Pretty simple understanding of what golf is, but it's the fundamental of the sport we all love. There's two main principles behind the rules themselves. So these two principles, play the course as you find it and play the ball as it lies, will be repeated throughout the rules of golf, and something to just keep in the back of your mind as we try to understand the rules and further your rules education. You always want to try to play the course as you find it, not altering it in any way and playing the ball as it lies. We know that's not always the case, which is why we have a bunch of rules to help a bunch of different situations that we'll cover in the next couple weeks. But you see here, you could end up with a great shot right down the middle of the fairway and it just ends up in a divot. So you ended up with a bad lie. It's just part of the gamble you play with golf, and vice versa. You could hit a terrible shot. It's way up the rough, but it ends up ending pretty much teed up from that rough, and you end up having a pretty good lie. So just know you got to take the good with the bad, and it's part of the game, and we're not gonna get relief from those divots and fairways. It's just an unfortunate situation, whereas you might also get a great lie in the rough. And the rules are structured and are complicated. There's no doubt about it that the rules are hard to understand, hard to digest. And there's a reason for it. It's because the game of golf itself is complicated. We see 5 great golf holes here with 5 completely different surroundings and features. And this is really why the rules of golf can be complicated, because we have one set of rules, 25 rules, that have to cover so many different situations that happen on every single golf course in the world. So you have sandy areas or desert areas we need to deal with, or if you're in Virginia, we have a lot of tree-lined holes, or ponds and penalty areas. So just understand that the rules are complicated, but it's because there's so many different situations that can happen, and that's what we need to cover and have an answer for every single situation. Golf is also unique in that the spirit of the game really comes into play. If you have any other sport, typically players are trying to take advantage of the rules and get away by breaking rules, which is why we have referees who have to call penalties, and it's not on the players. Golf is the complete opposite of that. It's a game of integrity where the player themselves are supposed to follow the rules and call penalties on themselves. Um, and being honest in all aspects of play. It's part of what the game is built on. And unlike other sports, you don't, yes, we have rules officials to help with situations, but it's really up to the players to call those penalties and make sure they're being honest. It's also a game of showing consideration to others by playing at a prompt pace and just making sure we're not slowing down the group, keeping up with play, and so we're not slowing up the whole field, looking out for the safety of others, not distracting the play of another player, and then, of course, taking good care of the course for the next person, replacing divots, smoothing bunkers, repairing ball marks, and not causing any unnecessary damage to the course. We do have some resources here for the rules of golf. We have two rules books now. You may have remembered a couple before 2023. The USGA used to print a player's edition to the rules of golf as well. It was a little pocket-sized book, and they decided to get rid of that. And so we only have two rules books now. We have the regular rules of golf, which just covers rules 1 through 25 plus the definitions. Then they have the bigger official guide, which is the spiral round bound book that has not only the rules 1 through 25, it also has the definitions, it has clarifications or examples of the rules, and committee procedures, which have the model local rules and recommendations for running tournaments. And you'll see on this the date for this book is effective of January 2023. So that was the last time the rules were revised. They were not revised in 24. So as long as you have the rules of golf that are effective of January of last year, those are the current rules, and you're good to go. The next place I would tell anyone is if you don't have a physical book is to go to the USGA website. USGA.org has under playing a rules of golf page. And from there, you have all of the rules as you see on the screen, 1 through 25, where you can click through and read the text straight from the book. And probably my favorite option is the Rules of Golf app. I know the world has gone digital in a lot of ways, and the Rules of Golf are no exception to that. Having the app handy on your phone, we all have our phones with us usually 24/7 now. So if you're on the course and have a question, you can pull up the Rules of Golf app, and it has that search bar at the top. And you can search keywords such as out of bounds or penalty area or anything, and it'll pull up the rules that are relevant to that key term. And it'll help you get to where you need to be to figure out what the answer is to your rules question quickly. So I highly suggest if you're working in the rules or you play a lot of golf to have that Rules of Golf app downloaded on your phone to access if you needed it. And our last section to start us off here is how do we use the rules book, and how do we really want to start if we want to get into the rules of golf themselves? So these main questions are what we need to answer before we can get to whatever the ruling is, starting with the identifying the form of play. We'll get into what types of form of play there are a little bit later in today's presentation, but in order to answer a question on the rules, you need to know whether the player is playing match play or stroke play. Maybe it's an individual stroke play tournament, or maybe it's a team event. And knowing which form of play they are playing is necessary in deciding what rule they're going to go under, and necessary. It could change what the outcome of the rule is. We have our W questions: who, what, where, when, and why. We need to know who and whose ball is involved. Did the player act, or was it someone else who acted on behalf of the player? What happened? What did the ball move? Did it go into a penalty area? And where did it happen? We need to know where on the golf course the ball lies, as well as where the breach happened, because it could change what the outcome is. We'll go through the different areas of the course in our next section here. And really, it depends on what part of the course you're on as to what the answer may be. When it happened, there are a couple situations where time may be important. For instance, we have a 3-minute search time. So did you find that ball within 3 minutes, or did you find it at 3 minutes and 2 seconds? It's important to know when something happened for certain rules. And then why. Some rules are intent-based. So knowing why the player did something could change the answer to the ruling, whereas other rules are outcome-based, and it wouldn't matter why the player did it. If the player did something, they would just get the penalty. If you're a beginner with the rules of golf, the first thing I would tell you to do is start reading the definitions. The definitions are unlike your normal dictionary, where it just gives you a brief understanding of what a word means. In the rules of golf, they give you so much more. And the majority of the time, if you have a question, you can go to the definitions, which are in the back of the book after Rule 25, and you can find sometimes you can find your answer in the definitions. So I would really understand what the definitions are. I would tell you to start reading the definitions, because if you understand those, you can really understand a deeper meaning of the rules themselves, since they overlap so much. And then once you start with the definitions, go into the rules themselves. So figure out what rule number your question is under, read the rules, and it'll help you figure out the necessary steps to take to either get relief from something, or it'll tell you what the penalty is. So start with the definitions, go into the rules. And if you're unsure, you can check the interpretations. These are usually at the end of each section within that official guide, and they give you more of examples of different things that can happen for more complicated situations. It can also give you examples of things that might or might not be part of the situation that you're dealing with. So if you don't find your answer in the definitions or the rules, the next place to go would be checking the interpretations in the official book, and it might give you a better understanding of how to apply a rule or something that might be involved or not involved. And last, if you did all that and you're still really not sure of what to do, always start with your professional staff at your course. We can also be available. We answer phone calls and emails all the time with rules questions, so we're available to you, as well as the USGA. So they have a hotline and an email as well that you can send rules questions to, and they always have someone on call to get back to you if you have a rules question. I'm going to pause there and pull in Amanda Kelly and see if we have any questions before we move into our first section of parts of the course.
No questions so far.
Perfect. To our next section here, which is parts of the course. As you saw, knowing what part of the course you're on is fundamental in understanding the rules, and it could change what the rule outcome is as we go through these different areas. So this graphic is pulled straight from the Rules of Golf book. They started adding graphics a couple years ago, which I think is great. It really gives you a understanding of what they're talking about, especially when we get to relief procedures. But we have 5 areas of the course that are defined in the Rules of Golf. So we start off with the teeing area, and this is the starting place for the hole being played. But there can only be one teeing area at a time. So it's very specific in saying the teeing area of the hole being played. And that's even more specific of, it's not all the teeing areas on the hole you're playing. It's specific to the player themselves. So if I'm playing the red tees and Amanda Kelly's playing the blue tees, our teeing areas are going to be 100% different. So mine is going to be from the 2 tee markers and then 2 club lengths back, whereas Amanda will be from the blue tee markers 2 club lengths back. So it's specific to the hole that's being played as well as to the player themselves. We also have bunkers, which are areas of sand that are put on the course. They're supposed to be penalizing. There's some things we can do in bunkers and some things that we can't do, and we'll see that in the next section. Penalty areas. These can be marked by the committee red or yellow, And again, meant to be penalizing and areas you don't want to be in, but there's a whole section on the rules that help us get out of these areas. And we'll cover the penalty areas in more in depth next week. Penalty areas can also be any area that holds water. It may not always hold water. It could just be a place like a ditch that sometimes holds water, or it could just be part of the course that the committee has decided to mark to help with pace of play and to give players an additional option in case they go into those areas. The fourth area of the course is the putting green. Again, this is very specific to the hole being played. So it's not all the putting greens on the course at one time. It's the putting green of the hole that you are playing. So both the teeing area and the putting green are specific to the hole, and everything else that is not one of those first four defined areas is referred to as the general area. So all the other tee markers or teeing areas, all the other putting greens on the course would be considered general area. It also includes both fairway and rough. A lot of people like to differentiate between fairway and rough. That is not differentiated within the rules themselves. It's all seen under that one term of general area. Defined. So again, as we go through each of these areas, each of them are defined a little bit differently. So starting at the teeing area, again, it's the 2 club length depth area from the tee markers of the hole being played and for that player. And it is it extends upward. So as we know, we like to tee our ball up in the teeing area to help us hit the ball further. So the ball may not necessarily be touching the ground. In that case, it's hovering above the ground on the tee, but is because that imaginary edge goes upward, it would still be considered in the penalty, or excuse me, in the teeing area, even if it doesn't touch the grass. In the putting green, it's the surface specially prepared for putting. There is no imaginary edge here, so there's no up and down, and we're on the putting green if any part of that ball is touching it. So if it's on if any piece of that ball is touching that shortest grass that's been prepared for putting, it would be considered on the putting green. Bunkers, again, those areas specifically created with sand. We again don't have any edges here, so our ball would be in the bunker if it was touching any sand that was in the bunker, or if there's any washed out areas or parts that are been kind of pushed away, it would be where the sand would be part of the bunker. Non-cover grass covered walls or any grass covered areas, like church pews and bunkers or any little island pieces of ground that has grass growing that are in the middle of the bunker would not be considered part of the bunker. So it's specific to that sand. So if your ball's touching any of the sand in the bunker, it would be considered in the bunker itself. Penalty areas, we have penalty areas, again, defined by either stakes, lines, or physical features. When there's only stakes to define penalty areas, it's the outermost edge of the stakes at ground level that defines the area of the penalty area. And with penalty areas, we do have imaginary edges, and these go both upward and downward. So if our ball is in a tree overhanging a penalty area, because we have that imaginary upward line, it would be considered in the penalty area. And these would be, your ball would be in the penalty area if any of that ball touches it. So whether it's touching the area in that's inside of the stakes, or if there's a line defining the penalty area, that line is part of the penalty area. So if it was just touching the line itself, it would be considered in the penalty area. Again, everything else that is not one of those first four is the general area. So most of the time, it's generally where players will be playing from. And if it's the ball is part of the general area, if it's not touching any of those other four specific parts and not out of bounds. And while out of bounds is not necessarily a part of the course, it's important to understand how out of bounds is defined. It also has an up and down vertical imaginary edge. So like penalty areas, if your ball was in a tree, but it was over that out of bounds line, it would unfortunately be out of bounds. And typically you see stakes that define out of bounds. It could also include lines. And this is different from penalty areas where now it's the course side edge of stakes or lines that define them. But your ball has to be completely out of bounds in order for it to be not in play. So if your ball is in between two out of bounds stakes, you draw an imaginary line from stake to stake on the course side edge. And if a piece of that ball is touching the course, it's your lucky day and that ball is in bounds. If that ball is 100% over that imaginary line, unfortunately, you would be out of bounds at that point and have to go back to where you last played from. And then we have how are they treated differently. So this image is taken straight from the USGA Rules 101 course that they created a couple years ago. But I think it does a really good job of seeing how each of these areas is different. And we'll start with the most favorable and end with the least favorable. So starting with the teeing area, which some people would argue is the most favorable area of the course. Again, it's the area that you can tee the ball up and give yourself the best lie possible. You're able to remove dew and frost, as well as sand and soil, and you're even able to alter the surface, which is something you're not able to do anywhere else. So if there was a weed growing in the teeing area that was right where your ball wanted to be, or maybe it was affecting where your club was going to go, you can pull that weed out of the ground, which is not something you can do anywhere else on the course. The putting green is probably the next favorable. Again, I like to think of the putting green as like a reward. You can do a lot of things once you reach the putting green that you can't do anywhere else on the golf course. For instance, you can always mark and lift your ball on the putting green. That's something you can do in other situations, but there has to be a reason for it. You don't have to have any reason to mark and lift your ball on the putting green. Once you reach that spot, you're able to do that. You're always able to clean your ball on the putting green and you're able to repair any damage on the putting green. So damage could be animal tracks, whether it's hoof prints or dog tracks. It could be scuff marks from someone who was playing the hole before you. But you're able to repair a lot more, whereas again, anywhere else on the course, you wouldn't be able to repair damage. They also have no penalty for accidental ball movement on the putting green. So if you were to accidentally hit your ball during a practice swing, or if you were carrying a bunch of things and dropped something on your ball and it caused it to move, as long as it was accidental, there would be no penalty to the player and they just have to replace that ball at where it was. Again, you may also remove sand and loose soil on the putting green. So if you had bunkers near putting greens and someone's hit their ball into the bunker and has deposited sand onto the green, you're able to go ahead and brush that sand or soil away before you putt. And that's on the putting green at all times. You don't necessarily have to have your ball on the putting green to remove sand and soil. As long as it lies on the putting green, you're able to remove those objects. In the middle, we have general area. There's a lot of things you can do in the general area, and it's not the worst place on the course to be. So we have moving loose impediments is allowed, and that's allowed anywhere on the course. With loose impediments, those are natural objects that might fall from trees, such as pine straw or acorns or stones. You're able to remove loose impediments, but you have to be careful because loose impediments, if you move one and it causes your ball to move, you will be penalized and you would have to put your ball back. The general area is a little bit more restrictive where you're not able to mark or lift your ball unless you have a reason to do so. But the rules allow you to have free relief for embedded balls in the general area, relief from abnormal course conditions, and those we'll see in next week's presentation with our relief procedures. There's also a penalty for causing your ball to move unless you're actively searching for it. So if you're searching for your ball in the general area and you kick your ball in accident because you were searching for it, didn't see it, you're going to be covered, no penalty because you were searching for it. And again, you just have to make sure you put that ball back and no penalty to you. We're moving on to our little bit more penalizing areas of the course, starting with bunkers. So bunkers, again, There's still a lot of things you can do in bunkers, such as move loose impediments. Again, making sure you don't cause your ball to move. But they're going to be a little bit more restricting. So we're not able to touch the ground with a club either near the ball or making practice swings. Um, the rules will allow us to get relief for abnormal course conditions, such as ground under repair or temporary water in the bunker. But they're going to be more restrictive in saying, in order to get that free relief, we're going to have to keep that ball in the bunker. There's also no relief for embedded ball in the bunker, unlike the general area. And like the normal course conditions, unplayable ball is an option to us in the bunker. We're still going to get the 1-stroke penalty for using the unplayable ball, but the rules are going to go on to say we need to keep that ball in the bunker. They do let us get out of the bunker, but it's going to add an additional penalty stroke, and it's going to be a 2-stroke penalty if you want to take unplayable ball outside the bunker. And again, we'll see that in next week's presentation. And like the general area, if we're searching for our ball in the bunker, there's not going to be any penalty for accidentally moving it. But again, we'll just have to make sure we put that ball back and recreate the lie. Penalty areas, probably one of the most restrictive. So we're not allowed to take abnormal course condition relief. We're not going to be allowed to take embedded ball relief. And we're not able to use the unplayable ball rule if our ball lies in a penalty area. The reason for this is, as we'll see next week in our relief procedures presentation, the penalty area rules will be used to get you out of penalty areas, and the rules aren't gonna let you double dip. So they're not gonna let you take abnormal course conditions, embedded ball, or unplayable if your ball lies in a penalty area. Again, like if we're searching for our ball in the penalty area, we're not going to be penalized if we accidentally move it. We're not going to be penalized if we move loose impediments. So we're free to do that, and we're also free to ground our club in penalty areas as well. But being careful that we're not moving our ball in any way. And our most least favorable area of the course is out of bounds. It's not on the course. You're not able to play the ball in that situation, and your only option to get that ball back in play is going to be stroke and distance. Unless we have the model local rule in play where we have the additional option for stroke and distance, which then we still have to take penalty strokes to get the ball in play, but we don't have to necessarily go back to where we last played from. And the final part, see if we have any questions for this section, is what do we do when a ball touches more than one area of the course? So when we go back to the ball touching the general area in one of the 4 specific areas of the course, whether it's the teeing area, the bunker, a penalty area, or the putting green, the ball is always going to lie in that specific area. So if our ball is on the fringe, which would be considered general area, but is also touching a piece of the putting green, you will consider that ball on the putting green, and all the putting green rules apply to you. Vice versa, if your ball is touching a penalty area line, so if it's painted red and that ball is a piece of that ball is touching that red line, and the part of the ball is touching the general area, not on the line, your ball would be considered in the penalty area in that situation, and the penalty area rules would apply to you. But what happens if your ball touches 2 specific parts of the course, whether it's a ball is touching both a penalty area and a bunker, probably the most common between the specific areas where sometimes a body of water marked as a penalty area is right up next to a bunker. And the committee has decided to mark the bunker or mark a line through the bunker with red paint to define the penalty area. So if a piece of that line is touching the penalty area as well as a bunker, there's just a hierarchy from least favorable to most favorable. So penalty area would have it would always be in the penalty area if it's touching the penalty area in another specific part. Next would be the bunker, and last would be the putting green. Now, I don't know if I've ever seen a bunker and a putting green where your ball could be on both parts of those courses at the same time. But if it was, the bunker would overrule the putting green. So that's just a memorization of hierarchy where if it's touching 2 specific parts, Penalty area is going to always have the number one rule and then a bunker and then the putting green. It's always going to be the least favorable to most favorable. And we'll pause here and see if we have any questions to answer.
You have a few questions here. The first one is on the putting green, can a player get a line of relief if he or she is putting over a former cup that has been covered with a green circular plug? So an old cup is not relief, it's considered part of the green. You are able to kind of tamp it down like you would a ball mark, but you do not get any relief from that old cup plug being between your ball and the hole. The next one is when your ball is in the general area, can you move sand and soil between the ball and the putting green? For example, if you're putting off the green, can you brush away sand on the collar? The answer to that is no. The only place you are allowed to brush sand away between your ball is when your ball is on the putting green. You cannot brush away any sand that's on the collar, in the fairway, in the rough, any place like that. And our last one is if a ball is in a bunker and it is lying against a rake, while removing the rake, the ball moves. What is the ruling? The ruling is pretty simple. Obviously you remove the rake, and then if that causes the ball to move, you just simply replace the ball to its original position, where it was, if the rake wasn't there, where it would be lying. And then no penalty stroke, continue on playing. And that's all we have right now.
Great. Those are some great questions. So keep them coming as we go through our next two sections here. Our third section tonight is forms of play. Again, kind of going through with what we started with and knowing what we need to answer in order to get to a ruling answer is what type of play we're playing. And we'll see what those options are. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about types of penalties. So throughout the rules of golf, there are 3 different types of penalties that you could see. Each one is designed to cancel out any potential advantage a player might gain by breaking a rule. So first, we have our one-stroke penalties. So minor infractions where the potential advantage is minimal or the toll for most penalty relief situations. So if it's a simple procedural ruling, such as causing your ball to move by kicking it on accident, it would only be a one-stroke penalty. You just have to put the ball back. It's also the most common penalty you see for taking relief from certain things, as we'll see next week. The general penalty is our loss of hole penalty in match play, or in stroke play, it's a 2-stroke penalty. And for the majority of rules infractions where there is the potential for the player to gain a significant advantage, but not enough that it would nullify the player's score. So the player did something more than just something minor, where it's a bigger deal, and we need to figure out a way to make it an even playing field. We have the general penalty. And this is different. So in match play, it's a loss of hole, and we'll see why in our next slide. And in stroke play, it's a 2-stroke penalty that gets added to the player's score. So this is if you were to improve your line of play when you're not allowed to, or hitting sand in the bunker. Those would be the general penalty. And last but not least, we have our disqualification penalty. Again, this is doesn't happen very often, but it's for breaches that are so significant that the player's score should not be allowed to count. This also applies when a player's actions are so against the spirit of the game that the player should be removed from the competition. So the example I can come up with for disqualification that might be the most common is if a player takes relief from something in a wrong place and gets themselves in a position that's a bigger advantage than where they were supposed to take relief from. And now there's no way for the committee to be able to count that score since they got such a significant advantage, whether it's by yardage or the difficulty of a shot, where they can't count the player's score, and unfortunately, that's when the disqualification comes in. We have this chart that has a great overview of match play versus stroke play, and it really does depend which form of play the competition is in order to get to some answers of some rules. So we'll start with match play, which was the original format of golf. It's the head-to-head competition. So in match play, it's between two players. It's 1v1. It could also be against two sides. If you have a four-ball match, it could be me and Amanda versus our two coworkers, Kent and Josh. And it's still 1v1 or 2v2. We don't really care what's happening on the rest of the course in the competition. We only really care what's happening in our match. And for that reason, we count by holes. So it's basically 18 or up to 18 one-hole contests. So it's basically 18 or fewer mini competitions that can be either won, lost, or tied. So we're counting by holes here. We have 18 holes to try to beat our opponent, and we're going to count by those holes. Scoring again by holes, whether it's up or down. So we say it's someone is one up, means they're one hole up from their opponent. Similar, the other person would be one down. And like I said before, general penalty in match play is always loss of hole. So you're gonna lose the hole in that situation and just move on to the next one. In match play, you have the right to know where the match stands. It's an important part of match play of knowing what the match score is. It could change the way a player decides to play a shot or plays a hole. So you always have a right to know the score. And in match play, we do have concessions. So you don't necessarily have to hole out on every single hole. If Amanda and I were playing to 5 feet and I knew that she's a great putter and it's going to make that every single time, I would just concede it and say, hey, that's good, pick it up, and we'd move on to the next hole. So concessions are only allowed in match play. It's also unique in match play that you can overlook your opponent's breach. So you don't necessarily have to call every single penalty on your opponent. If Amanda's hitting a bunker shot and she hits it poorly and it only goes up and out and she still has a long shot to the green, it doesn't necessarily hurt me that she may have grounded her club in that bunker. So I could overlook that penalty that I could call on her and just let her keep playing on from that. And in match play, we need to resolve doubts or request a ruling in a timely manner, which in this case is before you start the next hole. And that's just because we need to know, or we have to know what that match score is. We need to know who wins each hole because it could affect what you're going to do on the next hole. So if you have any doubts or if you had any rulings, you would request that ruling before you start the next hole in order for it to be considered. Different in stroke play, where you have one person playing against the entire field. So there are a lot of differences, and the majority of golf, I would say, we see nowadays is stroke play where it's one versus everyone. And so we're going to count each contest in 18-hole rounds. It could be one 18-hole round, it could be four 18-hole rounds, whatever the committee decides. But our scoring is going to be now considered in strokes, not by holes. So we're going to count all of our strokes, including any penalty strokes that you might occur the round. And that's why in our general penalty for stroke play is 2 penalty strokes. We need to have a way in order to penalize the player and make sure we have an accurate score for everyone. So if you do break a penalty that is a general penalty, it's going to be 2 strokes. And because it's one person versus the whole entire field, there's no guarantee of knowing where you stand in the competition. With technology these days, there's a lot of live leaderboards that players can follow, and that's a nice feature to have, but it's not something that needs to be given to a stroke play competition. There's no guarantee of knowing where you stand. In stroke play, you also need to hole out at every single hole. There's no concessions, there's no gimmies. The ball must enter the bottom of the cup on all 18 holes. If you were to fail to hole out, unfortunately, you wouldn't have a valid score for that hole and you would be disqualified. And the rules are really created to protect the field. So we see all of these rules, and in stroke play, we need to figure out a way for it to be the most fair for everyone to be playing a competition. And that's why we have these rules with penalty statements in order to protect the field and call all penalties. But we're a little bit more lax into resolving doubts before returning our scorecard. So unlike match play where we need to know or call make a ruling before we tee off on the next hole, we have until the end of the round or a player's round to resolve any doubts. So if you were to play in a stroke play competition, hopefully the committee, when collecting scorecards, would ask all the players, did you have any ruling questions? And we can go ahead and get those resolved before we finalize the scorecard and turn it in for the day. Because at that point, we can still add penalty strokes or fix anything or answer any questions before it becomes official. And we have how players compete. So we have three different ways that players compete in competitions. The first being individual, again, probably the most common. One person versus either the whole field of individuals or one person versus another person in a singles match. Our next is partner play. So a side of two or more partners competing against another side. Foursomes, which is also called alternate shot, is one form of partner play, and then four ball is the other form of partner play, each of which have their own rules within the Rules of Golf book that specifically answer all questions for foursomes or four ball. And lastly, we have our team competition, which is a group of players either playing as individuals or as partners, and then competing against other teams. So this is our college or high school event, or interstate team matches, or from state to state team matches. So the committee is in charge of determining how many teams compete against each other, how many individual scores count, and how many points a match is worth. Do you have any questions on the forms of play?
Nope, no questions on that.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll move into our last section here, which is ball handling. All of this is under Rule 14. We'll go into marking, lifting, and then what to do if you need to drop a ball to get it back into play. This is really going to set us up for understanding next week's presentation when we get into different rules procedures. We really need to understand dropping and what in order to have a correct drop, in order to get our ball back into play in case we get into any areas we need to take relief from. Before we get into that, we're going to talk about how to mark a ball. So marking can happen throughout a round. And if you were to mark a ball, it would just need to be marked with something before it's picked up. And that's just to ensure that we're placing it on its exact spot or original spot. Whether it's on the putting green, which is the majority of the time you would mark a ball, or if you're marking it for a rule situation that you might be able to do something to your ball in order to get it back into play. So if the player lifts the ball without marking it or marks it in a spot in a wrong way, or if you mark your ball and leave your ball marker in play, and you make a stroke with the ball marker there, all of those are going to be just a one penalty stroke. So our least amount of penalty strokes, it's more of a procedural error, and the rules are going to allow us just to take one penalty stroke if we were to do any of those. In order to mark, there's a couple things we need to understand, and marking is to show the spot again at where the ball is at rest by either placing a ball marker right behind, right next to, or the rules even allow you to hold a club on the ground right behind or next to the ball. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something physically on the ground. It could also just be your club if it's something you just want to do quickly. The rules allow you to hold your club on the ground next to or behind your ball in order to mark it. And again, this is done just to show the spot where the ball must be replaced after it's lifted. We have a definition of a ball marker. So again, the definitions are important to understand because they're used throughout the physical rules themselves. So we need to understand what a ball marker is in order to understand what this rule is saying. And the rules go on to say a ball marker is an artificial object when used to mark the spot of the ball to be lifted, such as a tee, it can be a coin, It can be an object made to be a ball marker or any other small piece of equipment. But the key words to this definition is that it has to be something that is artificial. So this doesn't allow us to use a pebble that we just found or a leaf that's on the green next to us. It has to be something that is artificial and can be one of these objects. And then we get to the section where who can actually lift our ball. So a player's ball can only be lifted by 3 people. So the player themselves can always lift their ball if they need to. In partner forms of play, a partner is an extension of the player. So they're allowed to use their can lift the player's ball if they need to. And then the rules go on to say anyone the player authorizes, but the authorization needs to be given each time before the ball is lifted, rather than just saying a general statement, hey, for the whole entire round, Amanda's going to be able to lift my ball. That is not allowed. I'd have to authorize her and ask her to lift my ball throughout the round if I needed to. There is an exception to this rule, and that is that a caddy can lift the player's ball without authorization, but only when that player's ball is on the putting green. So it allows us to kind of, we know caddies are there to help players and clean their balls and help them out. So the rules are going to let them go ahead and lift the player's ball off the green anytime it's on the putting green, and they don't need authorization for that. Ball. Something we all like to do. I know we play golf courses that may have a little bit more water and we get some mud on our ball. We're going to be allowed to clean our ball almost anytime we have it in our hands. It's really a question of what are the situations where you're not able to clean your golf ball, and there are 4 of them that are lifted with that are stated here in the rules. So anytime you have your ball in your hand and are taking relief from something, you're able to clean your golf ball. The only times you are not able to clean your golf ball is when it's lifted to see if it is either cut or cracked. So if you think your ball might be cracked from a shot, you can go ahead and lift it to see, but you can't clean your ball in that situation. You can go ahead and lift your ball to identify it. We need you to make sure that the ball you're hitting is yours. So the rules allow you to mark your ball, lift it for identification, but you can't clean it if you're identifying it. Now, the rules do say you're able to clean it only to be able to see your identifying mark, but nothing more than that. The third situation is if your ball is interfering with play. So if my ball is on the fringe and Amanda's going to putt it from further away, but my ball's in her way, she can ask me to go ahead and mark my ball and lift it. But in that case, I don't get a free clean. I have to keep that ball the way it was, put it off to the side and replace it if it was dirty back where it was. And the fourth one is we're able to go ahead and lift our ball to see if it lies in a condition where relief may be allowed. So maybe we think our ball lies in ground under repair, or maybe we think our ball is embedded. We're allowed to go ahead and mark that ball to lift it to see if it's in one of those conditions where we would get relief. If it is in one of those areas, let's say it is in an area that the committee has deemed ground under repair, or it is embedded, relief from those situations, I'm now allowed to go ahead and clean it since I'm going to be taking a procedural drop to get it back into play. But if it wasn't in ground repair, or if it wasn't embedded, I just have to replace it where it was, and I don't get a clean for that. If you were to clean your ball by accident when you weren't supposed to, again, the rules are just going to give you a 1-stroke penalty as a procedural rule that you didn't follow. So it's not a general penalty for cleaning your ball. It's just going to give you a 1-stroke. And dropping. So this is probably one of the most important sections to understand. Players, the goal for golf is to get the ball from from the tee to the green without ever having to pick it up. But we know a lot of different obstacles get in the way, and we have to drop our ball in order to get it back into play. So as we see going forward in our next couple weeks, there will be situations where we're going to have to drop our ball to get it back into play. And there are 5 things that we need to check off in order to make sure that we do drop it in the right way. So the first one is that the player must drop the ball. So no caddies are able to drop the ball here. You can't call in a friend to drop the ball for you. It must be the player who drops the ball. And when the player is dropping it, it must be dropped straight down. So you're not able to try to spin it or flick it in the air or anything. You're just dropping it straight down and from knee height and without the ball touching the player or the player's equipment on the way down. So once we check off those 4 things, we're doing great. We've almost gotten to a correct drop. The last piece of the puzzle is making sure the ball is dropped in the relief area. So whenever you're taking relief from pretty much any situation that we'll see, we're going to have a designated relief area. In this situation, we start off with where that circle is on the ground. This is a 1 club length relief area. So we have a club length to the left, to the right, and to behind. And we get this nice semicircle where the player is able to drop the ball. In order for it to be a correct drop, the player must do all the first 4, and it needs to hit a piece of the ground in the relief area. If we do that and it stays in the relief area, we've done everything correctly and that ball is now in play. But what happens if we drop the ball correctly in all of those ways and it bounces outside? So now we've dropped it, the player's dropped it straight down from knee height. It didn't hit anything on the way down, hit the relief area like it was supposed to, but then it rolls outside. The rules go on to say you're going to try again. So we need to drop it one more time. So we do it again, we drop it in the right way. It still hits the relief area and rolls outside. Well, now we're going to place. So we're going to place the ball where it hit the ground on the second drop. So the first drop, we don't care about anymore. So we only care where it hits on the second drop. So it's our drop, drop, place procedure. If the ball were to stay in the relief area from the second drop, we've done everything right. We're going to go ahead and play it. But if it still rolls outside on that second drop, we're going to keep an eye on where it first hit the ground in the relief area and place that ball on that spot. I'm going to go back here to what the rules define as knee height. So knee height is simply the height of the player's knee when they're standing in a standing position. So any way you can get to that spot is fine. You can see majority of the time we see players just kind of leaning over. That's great. In the bottom corner, you see a player's physically on their knee. That's fine too. Whatever that is for the player, as long as they're dropping it from the spot where their knee is, and a standing position. And again, players can stand either inside or outside the relief area when they're dropping the ball. There's no problem with that. And our last piece of the puzzle here is that the rules are going to allow us to substitute a ball anytime we're taking relief from something. So the player may use any ball each time they drop or place a ball under a rule. So in our drop, drop, place situation, if we drop the ball once, we did everything right, it hit the relief area and roll outside, that I don't want to use that ball anymore. Let me go to my bag and grab a second ball. Again, I'm dropping the ball correctly. It hits the relief area and rolls outside. I don't want to use that ball anymore either. So I'm going to go back to my bag and grab a third ball. And we're going to place the third ball on the spot where it hit the ground on the second drop. So don't know why a player would want to do that, but the rules do allow us to substitute each time they drop or place a ball under a rule. And this is true now, whether it's free relief or penalty relief. There's no problem with substituting a ball for any relief procedures. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a few questions here. Let's see. First one is, does holing out mean that the ball has to hit the bottom of the hole? A lot of times the ball rests against the flag stick, but is partially in the hole. Excuse me. So, my rule here. The rule states that if the ball has come to rest against the flag stick and the flag stick is left in the hole, if any part of that ball is in the hole below the surface of the putting green, that ball is treated as holed, even if the entire ball is not below the surface.
Yep, great question.
Our next one is can you use your foot as a ball marker if you don't move it? And I'm pretty sure I know the definition states artificial objects such as a tee, a coin, something that you can put there to mark the spot of the ball. I, I don't believe this counts as a foot. Is that correct?
That's a tricky one. I know the USGA has a bunch of rules series with Jay, I'm blanking on his last name, and he actually covers what a ball marker is. And I know he says a shoe. Now, I don't know if the person's foot is in the shoe or not. So that is something I would have to double check. I would say out of just safety and making sure you're not breaching the rule, I probably wouldn't advise you to use your foot. I would use something else, such as a shoe without the foot in it. But I would highly recommend you go find that video on YouTube, GA, because I know he covers something very closely to what you're asking.
Yeah. Our next question is, can anyone other than the player mark a ball's location? Yes. If the player has a caddy, the player's caddy can mark that ball, or if the player directly directly states that somebody else can mark their ball for them, they are allowed to mark that ball's location for that player.
That's another tricky one. So actually anyone can mark a player's ball. The rules only specify who can lift a player's ball. So you can mark anyone's ball, that's not a problem. But the person who's lifting it is really what the rules call out to, where it can only be the player, the partner, if it's a partner form of play, or anyone the player authorizes.
And this one, I'm not sure I've ever seen this question. When dropping back on the line, how wide is the line of the ball?
So when we're dropping on the line, this is kind of cutting into next week's presentation, but dropping on the line did change from 22 to 23, and we're now dropping on the physical line itself. So we're drawing that imaginary line from where the, let's just say it's a penalty relief, from where where it last crossed the penalty area, line it up with the flag stick, and you're going to draw an imaginary line. We're going to drop it on that line. So there's not really a width to it. We don't get any space. It's an imaginary line from 2 points and far back, and you're going to try to drop it on that line itself.
Perfect. And then another question here is, can you use another make of ball when doing a drop? So yes, when you're taking relief from basically a penalty area, whatever you're taking proper relief from on the golf course, you are allowed to substitute a ball for the original one. In that case, it does not have to be the original ball when dropping.
Correct. And I think this is kind of going into the one ball rule, which I would say the majority of the time is not in play, but make sure you're checking your local rules to make sure the one ball rule isn't in play, which in that case you would have to play the same make and model of the ball.
And then looks like our last one here is, can you elaborate on knee height? Specifically, if you can squat so the ball in your hand reaches your knee. I think I know knee height, obviously differs for everybody. And it can be much simpler when you're standing on a flat surface. You kind of bend over and, make sure you're keeping your knee straight, you're not shortening it. But it can be a little more tricky when you're standing on a hill and it's not a flat lie. You kind of can you help me out on this one, Amanda? I'm trying to think of how to.
Yeah, so you can do whatever you need to do in order to drop the ball. If you want to squat and that's more comfortable for you, that's fine. The
Yeah.
key is you need to make sure you're dropping it from the height of your knee when you're in a standing position. So you can't get any closer to the ground and try to beat the system by squatting. You still have to drop it from the height your knee would be if you were to be standing straight up. Those are all great questions. So next week, I've kind of alluded to it a couple times, but we're going to cover all of our relief procedures. So we have a lot to cover next week. We'll cover both our free relief procedures as well as our penalty relief procedures. Again, we'll have two presentations, one at noon and one at 6. I believe when you registered for this, you chose which days you wanted to attend. So if you only chose today and you want to come back next week, make sure you go back to that link to re-register. We'll stay on the line for a couple extra minutes to answer any questions that might come in. Again, we appreciate you attending our seminar today. We hope you learned something from this presentation as well as the ones going forward. And as I mentioned before, we'll have the recording on our website, hopefully by the end of the week. And I will also post the slide deck as a PDF in case you wanted to go back and just review the slides that you saw here. So thank you all again for being with us for this hour. We look forward to seeing you all next week when we cover our free relief and penalty relief procedures.